Hello and welcome to another Manage360 continued training webinar. My name is Chris Turney. I'll be your host today. I'm an implementation specialist here at Dynascape. And in today's webinar, we're going to be going over what needs to be updated on your Manage360 site to ensure that the information that we have is correct for the 2024 season. And that's going to be things like our budget, making sure that that is up to date so we get the correct costing and pricing within our cost book. And then the second thing is going to be updating our cost book to ensure that the materials and plants and equipment that we do have in there is the current price that we should be charging out this year. A little bit to note about the webinar: this is recorded, but there will be about 15-20 minutes worth of live questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, I ask that you save them. You can type them in the chat as the webinar is playing out, and they will be answered at the end. The first thing that I'm going to talk about today is going to be on the division side of things. So within Manage360, pretty much all of our pricing and those pricing calculations are derived from our division information that we have entered in there. So I'm going to hop on over to the divisions. You can get to that by clicking on your name, going to settings, and then selecting divisions. I have a few extra divisions on my site here. You would most likely probably have one or two. All divisions that you are currently using will need to be updated. But for this example, I'm going to be using the construction division. So hopping on into the construction division here, the first thing that can probably be updated is going to be our prefixes here for estimate and jobs. You're most likely set up this way. You may have decided to go with a different naming convention, but if you did use the E23 style of naming convention here, you're going to want to go through and update these to be 24 to represent the 2024 year. We will skip over this part over here, and then one other area you might want to review is going to be the crew settings. So if any of this information has changed, maybe in this example here, you were planning to work till 4, but it turns out that almost every day last year you worked till 5, we should probably update this value. And we will enter 5 p.m. in here, and we will set our working hours to be 11. Okay. Now moving on down into the division budget portion. So there's a few ways we can go about updating these values here. I'm going to start with the easiest way to update the information, and then moving into the more technical way to go ahead and update our budget. So the easiest way to go about doing it is to just add in your growth rate onto the values that you had from last year. So if the business has grown 5% year over year for the past 5 years, it's probably safe to say that it's going to grow another 5% this year. If that's the case, and you're okay with kind of going through, getting a good rough estimate using that 5% increase, you can go through and update all of these values by 5%. The one value you might want to go ahead and look into a little bit more, or look into it a little bit more in detail, is going to be our overhead. So this value can change more or less than 5%, depending on what's going on within your company. So if you've hired an additional office staff member, or you hired a part-time accountant or something like that, your overhead is probably going to increase more than 5%, because that person's salary and potentially any extra expenses that come along with it are going to be added into our overhead. So if anything like that has happened, I would not recommend going ahead and adding 5% onto overhead, but to go back through that original calculation that you did when you first signed up with Manage360 to help you figure out what your overhead value should be, go through, run it again, and make sure that this value is true and accurate. Out of all of the values here within the division budget, they are all important, but the most important value is going to be the overhead, as this is what we are trying to recoup using the MORS, or the multiple overhead recovery method here. So with the easiest method out of the way there, the next way that I would suggest going ahead to update these values is to go back through and use that initial spreadsheet that we went through when you first signed up with Manage360. So going on through and adding your values into the budget template. Now, you might be asking, originally when I went ahead and did this, I used QuickBooks potentially, or whatever accounting software you were using at the time, to figure out, how much did I spend on materials and plants and so forth. if you've been using Manage for the past at least year or so, we now have this data within the system, and we can run a report to figure out what this value is for the particular division we're trying to update. So if we wanted to do that, I will hop back on over to Manage here and hop back on over to the report section. So now that we're here within the report section of Manage360, there's a few reports that we can run to generate this information. And it does depend if we're looking at the maintenance side of the program or the construction side of the program, as they do function differently. But the first report I'm going to take a look at here is the job profitability report. So this report is very versatile, and this is going to tell us what our estimated costs were versus our actual costs. There's two ways that we can go ahead and utilize this report. If we have been making sure that we've been entering in our job actual information, we will be able to use the actual column for our estimated cost to determine how much we spend in each respective area there. Now, if we haven't been 100% on top of making sure that we are job tracking every job, that is okay. We just won't be able to use the actual number, and we'll have to go ahead and use the estimated value. The estimated value is still very good to use because that is the value that you're actually putting out onto your contracts, and that is what your customers were paying for. I mean, if you think that you've been grossly going over what you've estimated in a particular area, then you may want to look into that. But if you think, give or take, you've been fairly good with your estimation there, then the estimated quantities will work just fine for this report. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change some of the groupings here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to group by division, and then I'm going to group by item type. And then I'm going to leave the rest of the groupings blank. What this is going to allow me to do, I selected designer and not division. What this is going to allow me to do is break out the different divisions that has the construction module added onto it. And then it's going to tell me the total estimated versus actual cost values for each of my item types or item groupings. And those groupings are things like plants, materials, subcontractors, equipment, and so forth. I'll then be able to use those values to then go back over to the spreadsheet and enter them in for what my expected costs are for the year. Once again, these are going to be the 2023 year's numbers. So if you are expecting some growth, then you're going to have to add that value on as well. One last thing that I am going to do within the report here is I'm going to go to the very bottom and I'm going to uncheck open. So I don't want to run this report for any jobs that are currently open. Once again, this is going to come to how good you are with your bookkeeping there, but if the job has been completed, it should be in the closed status, and that is what we want to report against. We don't want to report against any open jobs that we currently have that are maybe from 2022 that we haven't closed out, or any new jobs that we've already started in the 2024 season. So I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to click the View Report button, and we'll let this load here. It may take 5 or 10 seconds or so to gather all of the information. While that is loading, oh, here we go. So we're able to see we have two divisions here that matched our criteria. So for this example, I'm just going to focus on the landscape construction division. So we can see here that we had an estimated cost of just shy of $30,000, and then our actual costs are coming in at $20,000. So this is what I was going back to talking about earlier, is that if we haven't been job tracking perfectly within the system here, this actual cost value may not be correct. Now, it is totally plausible that we did only spend $20,000 on materials or on items within this division here, as opposed to the estimated $30,000, but generally speaking, that's probably not the case, and just a few jobs were not tracked properly. What I can do, though, is I can break this division down, and this is going to open up my Costbook categories or item types here. This is where I'm going to grab the information that I need to enter into the division spreadsheet. So I can see here for equipment, I had estimated costs of $253 and an actual cost of $32. So here's a great example. There most likely was a job that had equipment on it of around $220 or so, and that was not reported against correctly. So you can go through and we can use the estimated costs for all of these jobs here and figure out, for labor, we spent just shy of $12,000, materials, $11,000, and so forth. This is not going to pick up anything that was completed using a non-contracted work order. So to get those values, we're going to have to run the report again, but we're going to have to use the non-contract job profitability report. I do already have this report open, but you can get to it from the report section here under the non-contract job profitability. I'll just go back here to get back to where I was at. So we're going to set this report up to function the same way as the previous report. So I'm going to have division, item type, and then no grouping. You can have items selected if you would like to. So if you are running through and you think, hey, our actuals don't seem like they are correct, I want to double check, we can go down to the itemized level and we will be able to see if $0 zero cost quantities have been added in to the report there. So that would tell me if I had an estimated cost of $300 and an actual cost of $0, that item was not reported against correctly, and I would not state that $0 was used, and that most likely the information was not entered in correctly. So going all the way down here, everything looks correct, and we do have both of our closed substatuses here. On the work order report, we are unable to track against open jobs or open work orders, sorry. They do have to be in the closed status. So if I go ahead and run this report here, I've already done it, so for sake of time, I'm going to hop on over to the report that was generated. And this report does look a little different than the one we were just looking at. And the reason for that is that we don't have any estimated versus actual. When we're talking about non-contracted work orders, everything is actual. So once in this example here, we can see our equipment costs of $10,000 and labor of $700 or so. And then down here under materials, we have just over $1 million worth of materials. So this is a test site here, so these values are obviously don't really make a lot of sense, but they're good enough to go through with the example. So with this being said here, I can go back to my original report that I ran. I can see that materials here we had estimated at 11,300, and on this non-contracted job report, we had a very large time and material job, and we spent just over $1 million on it. So I would go ahead, I would take this value, I would add it on to the estimated costs for the materials here, and then that would be my estimated cost of materials for the 2024 season. Now, once again, you may want to go ahead and add in that growth rate there, as these are numbers that are being pulled from 2023. And also make sure that there's nothing out of the blue. Maybe going back to this job, this may have been a one-off. You maybe were able to resell a whole bunch of a particular item or material there, and therefore this value is inflated. So just make sure that the numbers that you are pulling from do seem correct and accurate. So we can do that for all of the different categories. We can go back to our spreadsheet here and enter them into the corresponding rows. Once we have that done, we'll be able to go through and kind of just like before when you were setting up your Manage360 site, we will then be able to go and start updating these values within Manage360. One last thing to note, as I mentioned earlier, the overhead calculation is probably the most important, and this is a value that doesn't really hold true to the 5% or the growth rate metric. As I was mentioning, there are other things that can come up that could cause our overhead to increase or decrease. So I would highly recommend going through this exercise again and making sure that your overhead is calculated correctly. It's also a good habit to add a little fluff factor onto your overhead. It is very hard to think of all of the things that you may occur throughout the year that's not pertaining to a particular job. There's always going to be some sort of expense that comes up that was unplanned for. Adding in a 2 to 5% fluff factor on your overhead there is never a bad thing. And if you don't end up using it, that value or that addition that you added onto your overhead just ends up being profit. The last thing that you might want to go through and review again is going to be your equipment costs. So if you did go through this initially when you're setting up Manage360, you probably know that it is a fairly daunting task. There is a lot of information that does need to be entered in. I would not recommend going through this every single year, but if you have purchased some new equipment or it's been a couple years since you've gone through and calculated what these costs are, I would recommend going through and doing it again. Potentially your interest rate may have increased, or whatever the case may be, some additional costs may have been added on to the cost of operating this machinery or equipment here, and we definitely do want to reflect against that when we are estimating how much we're expecting to sell and how much we should be charging out to the customer there. If you do need any help with going through any of these spreadsheets here or updating any of these values, feel free to reach out to support@dynascape.com, and we can definitely set up a 30-minute session or so to review the data that you have updated for the 2024 season to ensure that you're sitting in a good spot and that you have done it correctly. So, with that being said, that is going to conclude, for the most part, the updating the division settings portion. It is mainly just going to be updating our budget there within the division, and a few additional items within there, like the job prefixes and so forth. While you are in the division settings there, you may want to go through and potentially review your markups, or your margins, sorry, I should say, on your specific item categories as well. So hopping back into the division, going down here to the bottom, you may notice here that everything is 20% across the board, except for materials, for whatever reason, is at 10%. This may have changed sometime throughout the year. It may have been done for a particular reason and never changed back. But if you did want to charge this out at 20%, now's a good time to go through and review to make sure that these values are correct. You may also want to go in and decrease them. It's totally up to you. But one other thing that you might want to review as you are going through this process. With the division portion out of the way, we are now going to hop on over to the Costbook section and go over a few ways that we can update our Costbook values to ensure that the cost and the pricing that we are sending out to our customers is correct for what we are going to be purchasing in the 2024 season. So I'm going to hop on over to the Costbook and we will go through that process now. All right, so here we are within the cost book, and there's going to be a few areas that we're going to need to update to ensure that our pricing is correct and current. So I'm going to start off in the plant section, but plants and materials are imported pretty much using the same process. So I'm going to select plants, and this will open up the plants portion of my cost book. And in the top right-hand corner, I have the option to import plants. So I'm going to select that option. Here on the plant import page, we are presented with three options as to how we would like to go ahead and upload this data onto our site. So the first one is going to be add and update. This will add new items onto our site if it can't find one that matches the item that we have within our list, and it will update any items if it does find a correct match. When it comes to the update portion, it will be using the criteria that has been selected down here under this section. So oftentimes, if we are just updating the cost of an item, the only option that would be selected down here is going to be unit cost. That means majority of the information that's within that item is going to stay the same. It will just be the cost that we will be updating. If you want to make sure that you're just updating and you don't want to add any new plants, you can use the update feature. And if you're adding a brand new supplier, you can go ahead and use the add option. In order for the system to be able to know if the plant is already within our system, the first and highest criteria that's going to use is the SKU. Now, the SKU is not required for an import, and you are able to import plants that do not have a SKU. If that is the case and you have uploaded plants that do not contain a SKU, the system will go off of, in the case of plants, the botanical name, common name, size, and supplier. If all of the criteria matches, then the system will go ahead and, in this example, update the unit cost for that item. Now, if anything has changed, if there's an extra space in that name, it's spelled slightly different, whatever the case may be, it will not update that plant. And using the current option that we have, using the add and update, that plant will get added as a new plant onto your site. When we're talking about plants, this isn't a huge issue, as generally speaking, the plants are not added into kits. And if a new one gets added and the old one is still within the system, we can go in, search for that plant, and deactivate the old one, whatever the case may be, or just know that when we are selecting a plant, always use a plant that has the latest update date. But yeah, generally speaking, on the plant side of things, it's not the biggest issue if you do have duplicates within the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import a plant list that I have. So I'll show you the plant list quickly here before I do the import. And what this is this is our sample CSV file, which you can download right here under the instructions portion, that has been populated with information from a few different suppliers here. I have updated these values, and the unit costs are now new, and they have been increased by a certain percentage there. And I would now like to update the plants within my system with this new value. You may also notice that some of them have SKUs and some of them do not. So any item here with the SKU will go ahead, regardless of its common name, botanical name, size, or supplier. It's going to go into the system. It's going to find the plant that has this exact SKU here and update it with the new unit cost. It is also not recommended to add in your own SKUs. I would only use the SKUs if they have been provided to you by the supplier. The reasoning for this is that the next time you get the plant list and it doesn't contain SKUs, if you go through and try to, do 1 through 500 or whatever the case may be, the plant may be in different order, and then you're going to go ahead and start updating an incorrect plant there. So if the supplier does not provide you with a SKU, do not add one yourself. Just go off of the common name, botanical name, size, and supplier, and that should work for the most part. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I'm going to go and click on the green import button here. I'm going to select this list and open it. Just by selecting open, it will automatically start importing these plants for me. If the import process does run into any issues, it will be displayed down here in a red error message. It's fairly good at explaining what needs to be changed. It will tell you, on line 151, there is no botanical name or no common name or something like that. You can easily then go back to the spreadsheet, find that particular line, make the change that needs to be changed, save the CSV file, and then try importing the spreadsheet again. This also may take a minute or so to go through the import process, as it does have a lot of data to scrub through. So while that is importing here, I'll hop back on over to the Costbook and talk about a few other sections that need to be updated as well. So back here within the Costbook, we will need to do the same thing for materials. Now, materials work a little bit differently because for the most part, materials are part of kits, or they may be part of a kit. If that is the case, we want to make sure that we are updating the material and we are not adding the new material that we have within the spreadsheet as a new item within Manage360. If we do end up doing that and we create a duplicate item or a new item with the new pricing and leave the old one within the system, the kit that item is a part of will not get updated. And if you decide to then use that kit on an estimate, an incorrect price may be added on to a contract. So when it does come to the materials, I would highly recommend trying to make sure that there is a SKU, or at the very least, the list that the supplier is providing you with is the exact same naming convention that they provided you with last year or the last time you did this upload. We do have a few other ways that we can go about doing this upload here or changing these prices. So an easy way to do it is going to be using the common actions button here. So we have this on all of the pages within the Costbook. They might be slightly different depending on what the item is, but they, for the most part, all contain the same generic options here to change the pricing or the costing. So what I can do is I can click the select all button, and what this has done is this has selected all of the items on the first page here, but we can see that there's 46 pages. Going up and selecting all 1,130 materials will select the remaining items there. I can then go into the common actions and select the adjust cost option here. What this is going to do is bring up a pop-up with 3 different options, but for the most part, the percentage option is going to be the one that's used. If you contacted the supplier and they say, hey, I can't get you a list, but everything's gone up 5%. What we can do is we can go in here, we can select the adjust cost by percentage, type in 5%, click update, and what we have now done is we have gone through and updated all of the costs within our system to be increased by 5%. Now, oftentimes that's not the case. I mean, it does happen, but oftentimes not everything is going to be increased at the same rate there. So you may have to group things by a particular supplier. So we could do the same thing. Go into the supplier section here. I'll find Body Limited, apply the filter, and let's say Body Limited got back to me stating that they increased their prices by 5%. I could go through, click select all, select just the 55 materials that I have with that supplier there, and make the change just for them. It does look like our plants are still uploading, so we'll keep going on through with some other options here within the cost books. So another area that we can go ahead and update while we're waiting for the plant list to finish updating there, is going to be our labor rates. So back within when we were on the client configuration spreadsheet there earlier within the session, we did have two other tabs at the bottom for figuring out what our employees' average crew wage is. Now, the values that I have entered here on the site are probably a little lower than what they are sitting at currently, but it is a good idea to go through here and update these year over year to ensure that your crew average wage is current to what you are actually paying out to your employees. So, I mean, it's not uncommon that, generally maybe year over year, every 2 years, somebody is going to get a raise, and we will be paying that employee more to essentially do the same job as they were doing previously. What we can do is I'll hop back on over to the spreadsheet here. And under the labor cost tab, we can go through this process again. So basically what we would be changing for the most part, this top portion should hold true still. If any of this information has changed, potentially you're giving out more holidays, or you've realized your non-productive time is a little bit greater than what you originally estimated when you were going through this process, you can go ahead and update those values. But for the most part, what we were going to want to update is going to be the average labor cost. So maybe a few years ago you started out, everyone started at let's say $17 per hour. You've kept the same crew around, and now let's say the average wage is probably sitting more around $20 per hour. We're going to want to go ahead, update this value here within the system, and we can now see that our loaded labor wage, or our productive hour cost, is going to be just shy of $27 for your average laborer there. Same thing goes over for the foreman. Maybe the foreman on average are not making 22, but they're making 28. We'll go ahead, we'll update this value, and our loaded labor wage here, or cost, is actually sitting closer to $37. So now that we've updated these wages here, we will need to go through and figure out what our crew average cost is going to be. I'll quickly go over this, but I mean, this is probably a fairly technical way to just figure out an average. It's going to be a 2-man crew with 1 foreman. If the labor wage is, let's just say $27 for the 2 laborers there, it would be 27 plus 27. And then we will add in the foreman's wage of 37, divide by 3, and that's going to be our new average crew cost that we can enter into Manage360. So like I said, it is important we do go through this and make sure that we update these values. It may only be a couple bucks here and there, but it is going to add up when we're talking about thousands of hours over the year. While we are on this topic, I will slightly diverge to go show you one other section of Manage that we're probably going to also want to update, and that's going to be the wage portion within our employees. So I'm going to go over to settings. Just open this up here in a new tab. And I'm going to go select employees here, and I'll just pick a random employee. So we do have this cost per hour section here under the general info tab. This is only available to people within the system here that have the owner role or payroll/finance role associated with them. If they do not have that role, they will not be able to see this field. The reasoning behind that is that within some states or jurisdictions, you're not allowed to show the wages that other employees make. It's locked down, so we want to make sure that no employees within the system have the ability to come in here and view this wage. But this wage is very important, as that when we do add this employee onto a timesheet and they actually go out and do work on a job, we will be able to track what the actual cost of labor was to complete that job. If we leave this value at 0 when we go through to do our job costing or our job actuals at the end of the job or end of the year, it's going to make us appear like we were much more profitable on the labor side of things than what we estimated. And the reason for that might be is, let's say 2 out of the 5 employees that were working on the job had a 0 cost per hour added onto them. And essentially every hour they worked on that job, the system was tracking it as free labor. So important to make sure that this value is updated and current. It's not going to be retroactive, so if this was 0 and we updated it to $20 today, this is only going to be tracked from today's date moving forward. The reasoning behind that is that people get raises throughout the year, and we don't want to skew or change the value of any previous timesheets that employee has been on with their new rate when they weren't actually making that rate in the past. So one other area that we would highly recommend you go through and update. It is best, obviously, if you go through here and update this value as the employees get their raises or as their pay does increase. Now, that's not always the case. I know it's hard to remember every little thing, but it definitely would be good to go through and review it as we're going through and updating the values within the system. Okay, let's hop on back over. Okay, it's still importing the plans. We'll come back to that in a second then. So when we do get our new wage here, so in the example I was just running through, let's just hypothetically say the new crew average wage is $30. We should go in here and open up this labor rate and update our crew average wage to be what we calculated. We do have a fixed price put in here, and we can see that in this calculation, we are actually losing money if we try to sell this at $52. So I'm going to uncheck that and allow the system to calculate the value that we should be charging out. Using this example here, we will be charging $83 or $83 an hour for our labor using this particular labor rate. This labor burn of 25% is probably also a little high. We could drop that down. And now we're sitting within a very reasonable rate to be selling our labor out. If you do notice that this value is very high, I mean, there's a few things that we can go ahead and change. I would definitely use the labor burden that you calculated within the spreadsheet there. Don't go ahead and change this value, but we can go through and override or change our profit to either bring this value down or up. You can use the fixed price option like it was selected when I came into this labor rate, but it's not really recommended as particular things can happen if we try to change the total value of a contract or things like that. Anything that does have a fixed price set within it will not be able to have their value changed or updated. So I think this labor rate is looking good and current for today's standards, so I'll go ahead and save and close. This is going to work for any new estimates or opportunities, I should say, that are created from this point moving forward. Obviously, any estimates that were created before I made this change will be using the old rate to do so. Now, this also holds true for pretty much everything within the cost book. Nothing is going to be retroactive when we do make changes onto it, just for the reason that I just mentioned there. So keep note of that as we are going through making changes and doing updates, that we will have to go into any previous or older estimates and refresh that estimate to pull in the current pricing. So while that plant list is still uploading, I can quickly go ahead and show you how to do that. So we'll pop on over to a construction estimate here. We'll just go into a random estimate. Once again, sorry for the data on my test site here. And once this page loads here, we can go over to the actions button up here, and I can select the refresh estimate option. Clicking this is going to present me with a few options that I can select from as to what I would like to update. So we can update costs. If I don't select subcontractors and miscellaneous items, they will be omitted from the update there. Overhead, which is going to be pulled from our division settings there. Profit, so within the cost book, if the profit has changed due to our division settings or a manual change, this will pull that in. And then taxes as well. So you can pick and choose what you would like to update, but if we are talking about updating our cost book here, the only thing that would really need to be selected is going to be the costs of everything within our cost book there. Selecting the apply button will apply those new costs to our estimate, and the profit margin that was set on the estimate for those items will still be applied to them. Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on with this plant import here, but it's really not going to show us anything special except for the fact that it's going to tell us how many plants have been updated. When we do go back over to the cost book here, and I do go to the plants section, you are able to see the cost last updated column here. So this is a nice way to be able to tell if the pricing is current or if it's older. And if I hover over this, it's also going to tell me who did it. So it does tell me that I am the person that uploaded this information onto the site. And this is also viewable from within the cost book here, or the shopping cart we call it. So if I go to the add items and I go to plants, I will be able to see the same information as to the date when the item or the cost was updated. Moving on over to a few other sections within the cost book here. So we've covered labor rates, we've covered plants, materials. We briefly covered equipment, so kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier with the spreadsheet there, if we do have any new equipment or any of our values have updated over the years, we can go in here and add it in or make any changes. Oftentimes speaking, the equipment cost doesn't really change unless we potentially made a mistake when we were initially doing the calculation. The only reason we would pretty much go in here would be if we have to add any new equipment into the system that we have purchased or we are planning to purchase, within the upcoming week or month there. We do not have any special ways for updating subcontractors or miscellaneous items. Once again, these items are often not updated all that often, especially with subcontractors. Generally speaking, the cost and the price is being added into the subcontractor item when you do get the quote back from them. So we don't have a whole lot of updating to do in there. And then miscellaneous items. I mean, there's a few things that could go in here, potentially, debris removal, design fee, any of these things that need to be updated. You can go in one by one and update them. As you can see, we don't have the capability or option to do an import for miscellaneous items. Now that we've talked about how everything gets updated here, I do want to take a brief moment to talk about kits. So if an item is updated within the cost book, it will automatically have that value added into any kits that item is a part of. So essentially, the kit does not store the item within it. When we're talking about the cost book there, it simply is just a link out to that item that we have within the cost book. So when that pricing change, that immediately gets added into that kit, and the next time that kit is added onto an estimate, it will be using the current pricing. If we do go in and decide that we want to update any of our production rates within our kits, that is also completely fine. But if we do have one of these kits on an estimate that we are currently working on, and we want those new ratios or items to appear on that estimate within the kit, we will have to delete the current kit and then re-add a new one. So we can't use the refresh estimate option to bring in new kit ratios. We will have to delete that kit and re-add the kit. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is going to be how we then go ahead and update our services. So services within the system definitely work differently than kits, and a service is going to take a snapshot of the items that we have added onto it at the time that we create the service, and those values will not get updated. So if we change some items or update some costs of items that are within a kit, and that kit is part of a service, the cost of the item within the kit will not get updated within the service. The reason behind that is that we like to think of services as a product or a package that you are selling. So, you're selling garden visits or you're selling grass cutting, whatever the case may be. And we don't want to change that price for you without you being aware. So, maybe I'll take this visit, mow and trim. We have it set at, we'll call it $70 per visit here. Maybe if my costs go up, if I pay my employees a couple dollars more per hour, I don't want to increase the price that I'm sending out to my clients there. I want to keep it at $70. I'll eat the difference. That's the reason why this value does not change. If we would like to go ahead and update these values, we can do so by going into the kit here, or into the service, sorry. We can go over to the items section to see what's in it, and we do have a kit within this service. So I can go over the actions button and I can select refresh pricing. So by doing this is purely going to just update the pricing. If I've made any changes to within this kit, the refresh pricing will not pull those changes in. So this is just pricing. It's not going to have anything related to kits. If I do want to update this kit and push it into the service, I will need to go back into the kit here and find the mowing kit. And within the kit here, I can see the services tab, and I can see that this is currently part of the service mow and trim. I have this little checkbox over here on the left-hand side, and this is telling me that a change has been made to either the items or ratios within this kit, and it has not been updated or pushed back to the service. The way that I can do that and update the service is to select the service here, and then click the Refresh Kits button. You're going to get a little message here telling you what this is going to do, and we can go ahead and click Yes. And then we'll get a little green thumbs up letting us know that the items that we currently have within our kit and the ratios that we currently have match what is in the service. So if I do go back to the service here and refresh the page and expand this out, you'll notice now that there's a few additional items within the list here. So that's how we're going to go ahead to update our service, and then in doing so we can now see that our visit price has gone up a lot, but that's the reason why we don't want to automatically update any of these items. So when it comes to the service updating, it's going to be a little bit more tricky. You can't do it directly from the service. You will have to go to the service to see what kits are part of that service, and then go into the kit section, select the services tab, and then make sure you have this little green thumb beside all services that the kit is a part of. So before we move into the question portion, I do have one last tip or trick that I wanted to show you in regards to updating items within the Costbook. We do have one other way that we can go about updating these values, and this is definitely going to be more useful for anyone that is not using SKUs within the system, and that's going to be using our material list report and plant list report to export our current materials or plants out of the system. And in that export, we can do it into a CSV file that is in the correct format to then re-import back into Manage360. So this is going to allow us to easily export a list of items out of the system, go in and make any updates or changes that we need to the materials or plants, and then easily import that list back into Manage360. So I'll give you a quick example here using the material list report. And this is going to work pretty much the exact same for plants, except there's a few extra categories there. I can select a specific supplier if I would like to, but for this example, I will pick all of my suppliers. And I am only going to export out active items. I don't really see the need to export anything that's inactive, so I'm going to be just using the active status there. We do have a few other categories that you could go through and use for this export here, but I'm going to leave everything turned on. I'm going to click the View Report button, and at the bottom, you'll notice there is a fourth option that says CSV for import/export. I'm going to go ahead and click this. This will maybe take 5 seconds or so to generate, and then once it's done, I will open it up in Excel, and we can take a look at the data that's been extracted out of the system. Like I was mentioning, this works the exact same for plants if we wanted to do it for plants. I guess the system's just a little working there as we're generating the report. All right, so there it is. We'll go ahead and open it up. And we can see now that this looks pretty much the exact same as that sample CSV file that you originally downloaded to initially import this information into the system. This is just being extracted out of Manage360 for us. So, we could easily go in, update some of these values here. Maybe this is now about $24, and just go through the list manually like this. This is very useful if you're not using SKUs within the system, because this will ensure that the items will update correctly and that no new or additional items are going to be added onto your site. And then to further that, that's going to ensure that any items that are within your kits or anything like that are updated, and that we're not adding, like I said, a new item into the system, that new item's not part of the kit, and then we aren't actually updating our costs. So when you do go through and update any of the values that need to be updated within this list, most likely you'd probably run it for a specific supplier there. I just wasn't sure exactly which suppliers were for materials and plants and whatnot, so I decided to run it for everything. But once you have updated any information within this list here that you would like to update, we can then go back over to Manage360, follow the same process that we were doing before, where we would go into the materials section, select import materials, add an update, or maybe even just update in this case. We can select just our cost, and then click import, and then select our file to be imported. So that is going to conclude today's webinar on updating your cost book and division budget there. I'm going to open the floor up now to any questions that you may have. I'll start with any ones that came in through the chat as the webinar was going on, and then I'll move over to any other live questions that you may have. If we do not get time to answer all of the questions, feel free to send an email to support@dynascape.com. Put attention Chris in the subject line there and ask your question that you want to get answered, and I'll shoot you back an email letting you know how to do whatever you're asking. And if it's further than that, if we need to expand, we can set up a session, maybe 30 minutes, go on, have a Zoom session, and walk through any questions or process issues that you may be having. All right, the floor is yours.